here in fact, in chapter 1. I'll just kind of go a little bit here in the beginning part in verse 2. It says, "The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God." Now, again, all of this was already prophesied many years prior about what would take place with the kingdom of Israel and the children of Israel if they would not turn to the Lord and return to him. And so, but they did not. And we see here that the punishment that came upon them, the judgment that took place, was this corrupt kingdom known as Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar is king over Babylon at this time. And of course, what takes place is they take, in verse 4, it says that they took children in whom was no blemish, but well-favored, skillful in all wisdom and cunning and knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, whom they might teach the learning in the tongue of the Chaldeans. It's believed that Daniel was probably part of a royal family, or at least a wealthy family there in Israel. And of course, Daniel was taken at a young age, and not just Daniel as well, but also Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And we talked about that they were relocated, they were re-educated, and they were renamed. The name Daniel, they changed his name, and his name was changed to Belteshazzar, and that means Prince of Bel, or Bel protect the king, and that was one of the idols that they worshiped there in Babylon, one of the main idols. And of course, Hananiah's name. Now, Daniel's name means God is my judge. And what they kind of did was they took their names and they meant this in Hebrew, but then they just switched it and they changed it to mean something not in their God or in Jehovah God, but they changed it to their Babylonian gods. And of course, Hananiah means God has been gracious, and they changed his name. The name that they changed was Shadrach, and that means command of Aku, or it was a Babylonian god of the moon. And Mishael is who is like God. Well, they changed his name to Meshach, and that is who is what Aku is, or basically who is like Aku. And then Azariah. Azariah, the name means helped by God in Hebrew. He that hears the Lord. And they changed his name to Abednego, and that meant servant of Nebo. And so this was the Babylonian god of writing, prophecy, and wisdom. Again, from many of the nations, the belief, they didn't have this belief of God who was one spirit, but also the reality that God is just one God, but they viewed, they had many different idols and many different gods. And so we looked at that there. We talked about, we looked at also Daniel's life there at the beginning there within the palace, and how Daniel had this integrity in his heart. Of course, the same for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They did not want to defile themselves with the king's meat. Many believed, one, the meat that was going to be given to them was unclean beast. It was forbidden by Jewish law. Some believe also that this meat was probably also, they did not cook the blood out of it. Jews were not to eat or drink of the blood at any point. And so, and then also the fact that these animals were probably offered up to the idols. And of course, for them, they looked at it and did not want to participate in this. And so Daniel requests that they be given water and vegetables. And that is what took place, that was given to them. And he did not want to drink of the wine. He did not want to eat of the food of the king's table. And the Bible says that he purposed in his heart in that not to do those things. He made a specific purpose. Now, he could have said, well, nobody's going to know. And now I'm in a foreign land. Now I've been renamed. I'm being re-educated. But he stuck to the principles that was taught him at a young age. And so we see God blessed him in his life. There is actually a story that Booker T. Washington talks about. When he talked about, he actually had a meeting with an ex-slave in Virginia, or from Virginia. And he talks about that this slave was, the Emancipation Proclamation was in effect, and the slave had owed about $300 to one who had owned him prior to the Emancipation Proclamation. And of course, this slave owed that money. He was actually many states away from the one who he owed that and was indebted with that money. But once they were free, the slaves could have said, you know what? That's it. I'm not worried about it. Debts are paid off. I don't care how much I owed prior. But apparently this slave, the story goes, that he trekked from Ohio and walked all the way to Virginia and paid back that master, the old master, paid him back the money and the interest that he owed. And he said, I made a promise and I want to keep my word in that. Well, this in that sense is this kind of integrity of life. Daniel was not worried, or he wasn't worried about what would be done to him. He wanted to have a life of integrity and follow God and be committed to the Lord. And so we see that God's favor was on his life. In verse 9, it states here. In verse 9, it says, now God had brought Daniel in chapter 1 into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. So there was favor in Daniel's life. It's the same that we think about Joseph's testimony and life as well. And of course, Daniel was given spiritual discernment. We see in verse 19 that the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them. And they were ones that oftentimes he would speak to and seek counsel from. So again, God blessed in that. Well, then we go on here into Daniel in chapter 2. It says in verse 1, and in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. And then the king commanded to call the magicians, the astrologers, the soothsayers, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans, to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. Of course, the king said unto them, I've dreamed a dream. My spirit was troubled to know the dream. And that's it. That's what he says. And of course, they're waiting for it. They're all standing there with great anticipation, waiting for him to tell them the dream. And what takes place, we see here, the Chaldeans said, O king, live forever. Tell us the dream, and we'll give you the interpretation. There's no worries in that. Just tell it to us, and we're going to give you exactly what it means. And the king said, I don't remember it. I don't remember it. He says, but have you ever heard anybody tell you that you should know what they're thinking about? You ever had that before? Should read my mind. Here, the king says, you need to know exactly what I dreamed. Boy, that's a pretty tough task. Pretty tough task. You know, I heard a comedian one time talk about his wife got angry at him. And angry the whole day at him. Of course, he found out what it was. She had a dream that she was being chased by a bear. And he was sitting playing poker with deer. And he said, that's just like you. She said, that's like you playing poker with deer, and you wouldn't save me. You know, so we have here the king getting very angry and upset because no one has a clue what he dreamed. Notice it goes on to say here, the Chaldeans, of course, put yourself in that predicament. What would you do? You have the astrologers, all the wise men of the kingdom, these sorcerers that so-called that would know and be able to have some kind of a wonderful ability. But again, for all of them, in all of their illusions and tricks and deceptions and lies, whatever you want to put, all of their whatever things that they studied, all of them said, we can't do this. Nobody can do this. It says here, the king said, the thing is gone from me in verse 5. If you will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, you will be torn in pieces. And what he's talking about really is just he's roping them limb from limb, and they're going to have horses go in different directions, and that's it. Well, that's a pretty gruesome death. I would say so. And that's I would say a little harsh, don't you think? But this is where the king, he can do that. And he says, you better tell me what I dreamed. I don't remember it, but you better tell me anyway. And he says, if you don't, I'm going to not only kill you, but your houses are going to be made a dunghill. And basically he's saying, I'm going to wipe away any memory of your family. I'm going to wipe it away. Well, he said, if you'll show me the dream, though, if you give me the interpretation, I'm going to give you gifts. I'm going to reward you. I'm going to give you great honor. I'm going to bless you in all of this. Show me, tell me the dream. And they answered, verse 7, let the king tell his servants, please, would you just tell us the dream and we'll give you the interpretation? The king said, no. Now, he's kind of catching on to this as well, because the king says, no, because you just want time enough to come up with some way of trying to figure out how to basically put the wool over my eyes and lie about a story of what you think it might mean. He says, no, if you actually say that you would know how to interpret it, you should also know what I dreamed of without even me telling you. So it is very interesting, and it's again, this does sound kind of crazy what he's requesting, but I think also he's a little shrewd in this, that he says, if you're claiming to be what you're the wise ones, you're the counselors, you have all this grand knowledge, and so if you're going to say that you would know the interpretation, I don't even have to tell you what it is. And so he says here, you would gain time, and eventually you would just try to come up with something, and I would just not even remember it. He said, but if you will not make known to me the dream, there is one decree for you. You have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me till the time be changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can show me the interpretation thereof. And again, he's not backing down this. He says, I'm not going to give you ample time to lie to me. I'm not going to give you time for you to try to dissuade me. I want you to tell me the interpretation. The Chaldeans answered and said, there is not a man on earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore, there's no king, lord, ruler that asks such things of any magician. We don't know of anybody that's ever asked these things. You're asking something entirely and utterly impossible. And they said, it's a rare thing what the king requires to show. And they said here, no one can show it before the king except the gods. Now that kind of takes the load off of them. Well, king, you're really just going to have to go and pray to all these gods. And maybe they'll show and reveal something to you, because we can't do it. By the way, couldn't they have gone, prayed to those gods, quote unquote, and gotten something? They know they're not going to get anything from those idols. But they said, well, you should go and ask for discretion and wisdom and understanding about the dream. So again, the king was very angry about this, very angry. And he says, I'm done. You're all dead. You're all dead. And what we see here is he commanded all the wise men to be destroyed out of Babylon. This would kind of, in a sense, be in a way like magi, as we would see them, like the wise men that were coming from the east. But then we see here, and notice, it says here in verse 14 or in verse 13, and the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. So again, you notice this is already taken place. The act, it's right, it's immediate. And so there are ones that come to actually kill Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And Daniel asks in this, he says, why is this so hasty? Why is this taking place? And of course, that's when Arioch, it says, made known, the one that was going to carry this out, told him what took place. And Daniel sought the king, and in verse 16 he says, give me time, and I'll show you the interpretation. And then we see in verse 17, then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, his companions. And he said, we've got to get out of here. Pack your bags. We're leaving. No, he didn't do that. What does he do? He goes to them, and notice he tells them, and he requests them as well to do what with them? Pray. Pray. You know, all the wise men, all the astrologers, all the soothsayers, all the Chaldeans, They tried to sit there and butter up the king. They tried to come up with some way and some excuse. And eventually they said, well, maybe if you go to the gods yourselves and maybe they'll reveal something to you. They knew it wasn't going to happen. They knew they wouldn't have a clue either. But here Daniel says, I know what we need to do. Let's pray and let's seek the Lord in this. And so that's what they do. They begin to pray. And Daniel, we see here, it says that they would desire in verse 18 mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. That was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. And then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. So we see prayer that's taken place. And we also see the praise that Daniel's given as well. He's rejoicing, and we see in this, he says, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. We see that wisdom, true wisdom and power is only comes from him. It's his. And Daniel says, God, I rejoice in you because it's you that has revealed these things. You know all things, and you have given me understanding in this. He's rejoicing and praising in the Lord. And we see this as we go on. It says here in verse 21, he says, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and he sets up kings. He gives wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. He reveals the deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. You know, when I read this here, I just can't help but think about when Jesus told the disciples, he said, you know, it's needful for me to go back to the Father because I'm going to send you the Comforter. And the Comforter, when he comes, he will teach you in all things, You see, he still can give you understanding, strength, wisdom, guidance in life. It's not about you sitting there and trying to pray over some kind of vision or dream, but I'm telling you that God can give you understanding and give you peace in your heart and clarity to be able to walk in this life day by day. David sought this and he rejoiced in the Lord. And he says, again, as we see, notice he says he reveals the deep secret things in verse 22, knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O thou God of my fathers, who has given me wisdom and might, and has made known unto me now what we desired of thee, for you have now made known unto us the king's matters. So Daniel is thrilled. He's rejoicing and praising. And of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, all of them praising, rejoicing in the Lord, what God has done for them in revealing this. And so Daniel goes, and we'll see the interpretation. Daniel goes to the king, and he tells the king here in verse 25, it says, then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said unto him, I have found a man of the captains of Judah, that will make known unto the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation thereof? And Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven. Not many gods, one God, only one. There is no, the magicians, the astrologers, all of them were correct in saying not a single man on earth could interpret that. It's given by God in heaven and revealed by him. He says there's a God in heaven that reveals secrets and makes known to King Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon your bed are these. And what did the king dream? Well, the dream that he had in verse 31, David says, O king, what you saw, behold, a great image. And by the way, Daniel will tell him, it's not for just our sakes. that this interpretation was made known, but that really the king would also know the thoughts within his own heart and mind. And the reality was this was to glorify God ultimately, to show that it didn't matter how many astrologers, how many soothsayers, how many magicians, so-called, that did not matter. Only God is sovereign. Only He is the mighty one. And what we see here, Daniel goes on to say here, what you saw in verse 31, behold, a great image. This great image, and what it had, it stood, its brightness was excellent. It stood before you, and the form thereof was terrible. This image head was of fine gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, his feet, part of iron and part of clay. And thou saw till that stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and brake them in pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone beat the image and became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So again, what he's seeing is a statue. This statue is majestic, mighty. And he sees the head of the statue is gold. The chest, the arms, all there, and the statue is silver. And it's interesting because, again, it represents different nations. But what happens to this glorious statue is that it ends up getting destroyed. And one stone, a small stone, actually beats that image, destroys it, crushes it, and the stone ends up expanding into something far great, and it fills the entire earth. Daniel says in verse 37, O king, art the King of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. Now notice what Daniel, what he's going, where he's going with this. He says, you are the king of Babylon, and you have conquered many nations. But you know who gave you that power to do it? Who gave you the ability in this? It was given by the God of heaven. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, the fowls of the heaven hath given into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. The kingdom of Babylon is that head of gold. And after you shall rise another kingdom. There's another kingdom. That kingdom is the Medes and the Persians, the Medo-Persian Empire. What would happen is Babylon eventually will be taken over, destroyed entirely by the Persians, the Medes and the Persians. And that is the chest and arms of silver. Daniel says that's going to take place, and then there's going to be another kingdom, a kingdom of brass. And many believe that representation there of brass or bronze is the Greek Empire, because what happened to the Persians? Well, you have one particular individual called Alexander the Great. And they end up destroying the Persian Empire. Now, Iran actually is Persian. That is, in fact, a lot of Iranians, they don't at all like their government. Most of them hate it. But they also will say, no, call me a Persian. Persian. A lot of history in that. We know the Greeks ended up taking over. And then the legs of iron. The legs of iron, he goes on to say here, he says in verse 39, there will rise another kingdom inferior to thee, the silver kingdom. There will be another one, the kingdom of brass or bronze, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And there's a fourth kingdom that shall be strong as iron. For as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things, And as iron that breaks, all these shall break in pieces and bruise. And this fourth kingdom is Rome, the Romans. And whereas you saw the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as you saw the iron mixed with the miry clay. So what happens? Rome. The history of Rome is very interesting. Rome lasts for about 1,000 years. And the start of Rome, again, this is just a fable, but the one apparently who started Rome, his name was Romulus. Ended up killing his brother Remus over that. And then the final emperor in history to be over Rome, his name also was Romulus. Romulus. Rome has a very interesting history, but 1,000 years. By the way, what have we modeled our government oftentimes as? Rome. People talk about it being a Christian. Well, it's just as much a Roman government as well. They were very much enamored with the Roman system. And so here he says that this kingdom also will be great, and it will rule, and it'll be strong as iron. He says, but also it will break apart, and the kingdom shall be divided. There shall be in it the strength of iron, as much as the iron mixed with the miry clay, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay. So the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And you saw the iron mixed with miry clay. They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to one another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Now some look at this here, that Daniel, you see, that kingdom's to come. There is a heavenly kingdom, Christ, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, that will come and set up that kingdom. But there's some that look at that it's not just depicting a timeline, but also when you read in Revelation, it details about Babylon, even at that time. You have, again, what you have here with the vision. Ultimately, what it reveals to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, is that your kingdom will not last. And no kingdom will last. What is happening this year, all that's taken place, when we look at, I just saw where Pakistan and now Iran fighting each other. You have Houthis, and you have Hamas, and you have Israel, and you have Ukraine, and you have Russia. And by the way, it's not, you really have to dig deep. You're going to know all the implications of what's going on. It's sad across the board. You can sit there and you can pick and choose and say, well, I don't like this guy, and they're all bad. You better be careful with that. The believer, our kingdom is not in this world. We have a kingdom coming. But sadly, we see that all these nations, each one, what is happening, what's being set up with Russia, Brazil, India, China, that's called the BRICS. South America, they are aligning. Why? Because they are wanting to get away from the American dollar. Do you think we're going to let them do that? No. This is why some of the things happening too. You don't want, because that's going to hurt the American dollar. And again, we're not going to get into all that. What I'm saying is that every country, they all kind of have their little say-so. And they all have this mentality, well, we're going to line up with this country. Well, we'll fight you if you do this. Well, if you do this, and everybody's talking about nukes, and they're all talking about all these things. We look at it and realize the fact is that no nation is ever going to last. God's blessed America, but we are a very young nation, and sadly, we have gone away from God. And the mentality for so many people is that, we're going to last. We're so great. We're so great. We're so powerful. Guess what? Nebuchadnezzar was at that place where he believed the Babylonian Empire would last for eternity. And Daniel says, no, listen, you're king, that's true, but God gave you the power, the ability. And he says, by the way, your nation's going to be destroyed. And by the way, the nation that comes after you, that's going to be destroyed. Oh, and also the nation that destroys them, they're going to be destroyed. And then the other nation's going to be destroyed. And eventually, guess what's going to happen, though? There's going to be a stone that wipes it all out. And that stone, the chief cornerstone, it's going to become something far greater, and it's going to fill the entire earth. Jesus is coming back, and he's coming back. He's going to make new heavens and a new earth. He's the King of kings and Lord of lords. And if we don't get anything else out of this, now Nebuchadnezzar, he is shocked because all of this, when Daniel's telling him, he's remembering what was taking place in his dream. And he realizes God gave Daniel that ability and power to be able to tell him the interpretation. And he says, truly, there's no other God except your God who reveals secrets. And he blesses Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He blesses them. And of course, God blesses them. And Daniel, in verse 47, it says, the king answered Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings. Again, that's very, very similar when we read in Revelation. Every eye will see him, and his name, he is called King of kings and Lord of lords. So I think just again, when we close out, to be reminded. We can worry, we can be concerned about all that's taken place. There's so many, they have things mapped out. And they think it's going to go this way. Another nation thinks it's going to go this way. I don't know. I just know this, that this world is not my home. I'm just passing through. And I'm waiting for that glorious kingdom to come. But while we're here, we need to seek to reach out and to help to continue to spread the gospel and look towards that kingdom, that heavenly kingdom. Well, let's pray this evening.